The sun was spilling gold across the park that Saturday morning, the kind of light that makes the grass look freshly painted. David and I walked side by side, our fingers loosely laced while Buddy tugged on the leash, nose twitching at every scent in the air. We laughed about silly things. A couple jogging in neon shorts, the smell of coffee drifting from a food cart nearby. Everything felt so ordinary, so safe. And yet, I've learned that sometimes it's the tiniest moment that shatters the illusion. Out of nowhere, Buddy stiffened. His ears shot up, and before I could even react, he bolted ahead, dragging me a few steps until David grabbed the leash. But instead of barking or circling nervously like he always did with strangers, Buddy launched himself at a woman by the fountain. His tail wagged like a helicopter blade, his paws clung to her dress, and he smothered her face with kisses. Pure, unfiltered joy, the kind of greeting he reserved for people he knew. The woman bent down, laughing as if this were the most natural thing in the world. She stroked his head, cooing, "Oh, he remembers me." My heart skipped. Remembers. My smile froze, but my mind raced. Buddy doesn't react like this to strangers. Ever. I swallowed hard, my voice sharper than I meant as I asked, "Remembers? From where?" The woman straightened up, brushing dog hair from her dress with an easy grin. "Guess I just have that effect on animals," she said lightly, as if Buddy's reaction was nothing more than chance. But I knew better. Buddy didn't just lose himself like that for no reason. His loyalty had always been steady, almost protective, and seeing him melt into her arms set off an alarm deep in my chest. David laughed. That nervous laugh I'd heard before, the kind he used when he wanted to smooth things over fast. He tugged Buddy back, muttering something about him being too friendly these days. But my eyes stayed on her, watching the way Buddy's body leaned toward her even when David pulled. His whines, his eager little jumps. It wasn't the excitement of a dog meeting someone new. It was recognition, familiarity. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, though the morning air was crisp. I forced a polite smile, the kind you give when you're trying to hide 1,000 questions. "Well," I managed, my voice caught between casual and cutting. "He doesn't usually act like this with strangers." My words hung in the air, heavier than I intended, and for a second, I thought I caught the faintest flicker of unease in her eyes. The woman crouched again, scratching behind Buddy's ears like she'd done it 100 times before. "Such a sweetheart," she murmured, almost too comfortably. My stomach twisted. I could feel the weight of something unsaid pressing between us, like an invisible thread pulling tight. I wanted to shake it off, to chalk it up to coincidence, but Buddy's joy screamed otherwise. David cleared his throat and tugged at my arm, urging me to move along. "Come on, let's not hold her up," he said quickly, flashing a smile that looked more like a mask than anything genuine. I glanced at him, searching for reassurance, but all I found was that familiar glimmer of evasion. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. Buddy whined when the woman finally let go, as if he was being pulled away from someone he belonged to. We walked on, but I couldn't hear David's small talk anymore. My mind was buzzing, replaying her words like a broken record. "Oh, he remembers me." The phrase clung to me, unsettling, refusing to let go. And deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Because if Buddy remembered her, then I had to ask myself the question that burned hotter with every step. Why? She introduced herself as Sophie, all casual smiles, like she'd just bumped into us by chance. "I guess I just give off dog lover energy," she joked, her tone breezy, almost rehearsed. But while she talked, Buddy sat right at her feet, alert, waiting. Then she whispered a single word, a command I'd never heard before, and to my shock, Buddy obeyed instantly. No hesitation, just instant obedience, like he'd been trained by her. My chest tightened. I forced a laugh, pretending it was nothing, but my stomach churned. I glanced at David, searching his face for some clue, and there it was. That nervous chuckle again. Too quick, too thin. "He's full of surprises lately," he said, tugging Buddy's leash, pulling him back like he was trying to erase the moment. But the damage was done. My dog had listened to her, not me. And that meant only one thing. Sophie wasn't a stranger at all. I tucked that thought away, pretending I hadn't noticed. "Nice to meet you," I said, my smile stiff. Sophie's eyes lingered just a second too long before she turned to leave. Buddy whined, straining against the leash until she disappeared down the path. I stayed silent, but inside, the unease had sharpened into suspicion. It felt like the earth beneath my feet had tilted, and David's hand squeezing mine was suddenly more of a distraction than comfort. On the walk back home, I couldn't keep my thoughts from circling. I asked David casually, almost playfully, "So, how did Sophie know that command? Since when does Buddy listen to strangers like that?" His grip tightened on the leash, and he didn't miss a beat. "You're reading too much into it," he said, brushing it off with that dismissive tone he used whenever I poked too close to something he didn't want to explain. My pulse quickened. Paranoid. That's the word he'd use next. I could already feel it coming, like clockwork. And sure enough, he sighed and muttered, "Mia, don't be paranoid. She probably just guessed the word." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But the more he spoke, the less convinced I was. His voice carried that shaky edge, the one that always betrayed him when he lied about little things, like forgetting a bill or misplacing his phone. Only this time, it wasn't little. I stayed quiet, staring at Buddy trotting ahead, tail wagging, still restless as if searching the park for Sophie's face. My chest tightened again. That dog was my compass, loyal, honest, incapable of pretense. And in that moment, it felt like Buddy was telling me the truth David refused to admit. My hands curled into fists inside my jacket pocket. Something was off, and no amount of paranoid would erase it. That night, the house felt heavier than usual, like the walls themselves were holding secrets. After dinner, Buddy paced near the front door, scratching and whining softly, his eyes fixed on the entryway. It wasn't his usual restless energy. It was expectancy, the kind of waiting a dog does when someone familiar is about to arrive. My stomach dropped as I watched him, ears perked, tail flicking with hope. He wasn't waiting for me. He wasn't waiting for David. He was waiting for her. I sat on the couch, arms wrapped tightly around myself, trying to push the thought away. But Buddy made it impossible. Every few minutes he'd sit, ears tuned, then rush to the door at the faintest sound outside. I whispered his name, trying to distract him, but he barely looked my way. His loyalty was clear, unshakable, and suddenly I realized it wasn't mine alone anymore. That truth hit harder than any words David could throw at me. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, my chest aching with a mix of anger and clarity. Buddy already knew Sophie. He knew her commands, her scent, her touch. And if Buddy knew her, that meant she had been here before. The thought echoed in my mind like a drum beat, steady and merciless. I didn't say a word to David that night, not yet. Instead, I tucked my suspicion close, where it could grow stronger, sharper. Because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach and a certainty I could no longer ignore. David's reassurances had dissolved into thin air, leaving only the echo of his nervous laugh. If Buddy had been my first clue, then it was time to follow the trail myself. Quietly, carefully, I slipped into detective mode, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I needed to know. I started with his phone, waiting until he hopped in the shower. My hands trembled as I scrolled, my heart pounding in my ears like a war drum. Names, numbers, nothing unusual at first, until one contact caught my eye. A man's name. But the messages beneath it? They weren't written to a man. The tone was intimate, playful, peppered with inside jokes that didn't belong to us. And there it was, clear as daylight. Sophie's name tucked into a thread where she didn't belong. My throat tightened as I swiped through the messages, every line slicing deeper than the one before. The lies, the little emojis, the affection. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't imagination. It was betrayal spelled out on a glowing screen. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone, but I forced myself to keep looking, because I wasn't done yet. I dug deeper, opening the photo gallery, and that's when the air left my lungs. Buddy's golden fur filled the screen, not at the park, not at our home, but curled up on a gray couch I didn't recognize. Sophie's apartment. My fingers pinched the screen to zoom in, and there it was, undeniable. David's jacket hanging on the back of a chair, his shoes kicked carelessly near the door. Proof, framed in pixels, that Buddy had been there, that they had been there. A fire ignited in my chest, burning hotter with every swipe. Photo after photo. Buddy sprawled across her rug, Buddy playing with a toy I'd never bought. Buddy resting his head on her lap like she belonged to him. Each image was a knife, cutting away the version of my life I thought was real. I pressed a hand to my mouth, holding back a sob that threatened to burst out. Rage and heartbreak tangled together until I could barely breathe. I set the phone down, my hands clammy against the screen. Every instinct screamed to march into the bathroom, to throw the evidence in David's face, to scream until the walls shook. But something stronger held me back. Not fear, not doubt, strategy. If he could keep secrets, so could I. And this time, mine would be louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. I closed the phone and slipped it back exactly where I'd found it, careful not to leave a single trace. My heart still thundered in my chest, but my face, when David stepped out of the shower minutes later, stayed calm, almost bored. He kissed my cheek, wrapped in a towel, and I managed to smile back, though inside I was drowning in the weight of what I knew. He had no idea the game had shifted. The rest of the day, I watched him through new eyes. Every laugh, every excuse, every glance at his phone was part of a puzzle I'd already solved. But instead of confrontation, I carried silence like armor. It wasn't weakness. It was preparation. He thought he held the power, sneaking around with Sophie in the shadows. But I had the light now, and with it, the chance to choose how his secrets would finally come undone. I sat on the porch that evening, Buddy's head resting on my lap, his eyes looking up at me with a loyalty that never wavered. My fingers stroked his fur, steadying my breath. "You showed me, didn't you?" I whispered. And in that moment, I made a promise, not to David, not to Sophie, but to myself. Their betrayal wouldn't break me. It would fuel me. And when the time was right, the truth would explode in the open where neither of them could hide. By the time the next weekend rolled around, I had my plan polished, every detail tucked neatly into place. On the surface, it looked harmless, just a Sunday barbecue, nothing out of the ordinary. I invited family, a few close friends, the kind of people David would never suspect. He was even cheerful about it, joking about grilling too many burgers and bragging about his famous marinade. He had no idea he was seasoning his own downfall. I moved through the day with deliberate calm, setting the table, pouring drinks, greeting guests with a smile that masked the storm inside me. Buddy wagged his tail, weaving between legs, soaking up the attention. But I knew the real moment hadn't come yet. I could feel it building, like a secret drumbeat only I could hear. And when the time came, I wanted it to strike hard, clean, undeniable. The laughter of family filled the backyard, The smell of charcoal clung to the air, and David played the part of the perfect host. But every time I looked at him, flipping burgers and clinking glasses, all I saw was a liar in borrowed skin. My hands itched to pull the curtain back, to let everyone see him the way I now did. And soon enough, that curtain was about to fall. After lunch, when the plates were stacked and people were settling into that lazy afternoon lull, I slipped inside and opened the back gate. Buddy darted out, tail high, ears pricked, like he already knew his cue. A few minutes later, right on schedule, Sophie arrived. I'd made sure she was accidentally invited through a mutual acquaintance who thought it was nothing more than friendly courtesy. But for me, it was the final piece of the trap. Buddy spotted her instantly. He barreled across the yard, whining with joy, his paws clawing at her dress, tail wagging furiously. Gasps rippled through the group. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. I let my gaze sweep across the faces. Confusion, curiosity, dawning realization. And then I smiled, sweet and sharp, the way you do when you've been waiting for a punchline only you understand. Funny, isn't it? I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. My voice carried across the yard, calm but cutting. Buddy only reacts like that to people he knows well. Almost like Sophie's been around our home for months. The words landed heavy, slicing through the air. Sophie's smile faltered, David's face drained pale, and the yard, once buzzing with laughter, fell into stunned silence. David's hand froze on the serving tray, his knuckles whitening as if he could somehow grip the lie tighter. Sophie stammered, brushing Buddy off, but the damage was already written across every face in that backyard. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of it press down on him. Then, with steady hands, I pulled out my phone. One swipe, and the screen lit up with photos no one could argue with. Gasps cut through the air as I held it high. Buddy curled on Sophie's couch. Buddy sprawled across her rug. David's jacket hanging in the background, his shoes by the door. I didn't need to narrate. The images spoke louder than any accusation I could make. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm, almost gentle. Seems like Buddy's been more loyal than some people I know. Sophie's face crumpled, David's lips parted, but no excuse came out. The whispers spread, sharp and merciless, each one another nail in the coffin of his credibility. And I stood there, tall, unshaken, with Buddy pressed loyally against my leg. This wasn't just exposure. It was justice unfolding in front of every witness who mattered. And the best part? I hadn't even raised my voice. The aftermath was exactly what I'd intended. David stood there, humiliated, stripped bare in front of the very people whose respect he thrived on. His excuses tangled in his throat, his eyes darting desperately for someone to save him. But no one did. Sophie fled first, her heels clicking against the pavement as she disappeared down the street, Buddy whining after her before turning back to press against me. She didn't deserve his loyalty. Neither did David. In the days that followed, the phone calls started. Long voicemails, texts at every hour, begging, pleading, bargaining. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. We can fix this. Each word was nothing but static to me, noise I refused to let back in. I didn't respond once. I'd given him enough of my time, enough of my trust, enough of my heart. And now, I was done. Filing for divorce was easier than I expected. Cold paperwork, signatures on a page, but behind every pen stroke was the heat of my resolve. I secured the house, but more importantly, I secured Buddy. He was mine, as he'd always been, the only one who never faltered, never lied. David tried to argue, tried to twist the facts, but even he couldn't deny it. Buddy had chosen me. The nights grew quieter once David was gone, but instead of emptiness, I felt something else. Space. Space to breathe, to laugh without second-guessing, to move through my own home without the weight of suspicion pressing down on me. Buddy seemed lighter too, as if he sensed the shift. He followed me room to room, curling at my feet when I read, nudging my hand when I lingered too long in thought, reminding me that loyalty doesn't waver, not when it's real. There were moments when guilt tried to creep in, whispering that maybe I'd gone too far by exposing him so publicly. But then I'd remember the photos, the messages, the look in Sophie's eyes, and the way David dismissed my instincts with that cruel word, paranoid. No. He'd written his own ending long before I revealed it. I'd simply pulled the curtain back, and for the first time in years, I felt free from his shadows. Friends called, some offering sympathy, others quiet admiration for the way I'd handled it. I didn't brag, I didn't gloat, but deep down, I knew I had taken my power back. And nothing, not David's pleas or Sophie's shame, could undo that. My world was smaller now, yes, but cleaner, honest, and it was enough. A few weeks later, I found myself back at the park on another bright Saturday morning. The air was crisp, children's laughter floated across the playground, and the world felt lighter, as if it had exhaled with me. Buddy bounded ahead, chasing after the ball I threw, his golden fur catching the sunlight like it was spun from fire. His joy was contagious, pure and unshaken, and for the first time in months, I laughed freely, without restraint. When he raced back, tongue lolling, I knelt down and hugged him tight, burying my face in his fur. He smelled of grass and sunshine, nothing complicated, nothing false. In that moment, I realized that through every lie, every betrayal, Buddy had been the one constant truth. He had chosen me long before I ever knew I needed choosing, and I would never forget that. I kissed the top of his head, whispering the words that sealed it all. Dogs always know who's loyal. Buddy chose me, and I chose freedom. And as I stood, watching him dart back into the open field, I felt it, not just survival, but liberation. My life, once tangled in secrets, was mine again.
They say never mix business with family, but when my brother stole my software architecture and pitched it as his own to our investors, he forgot one crucial detail. I had embedded a signature in the code that would reveal his betrayal exactly when he needed it most, during his pitch to secure $50 million in Series B funding. My name is Daniel Way, and until 3 months ago, I was the Chief Technology Officer at Quantum Cipher, a cybersecurity startup I co-founded with my brother Eric. We had built the company from nothing to a valuation of over $200 million in just under 4 years. Our encryption technology promised to revolutionize data security in an increasingly vulnerable digital landscape. The journey had been exhilarating, late nights fueled by caffeine and ambition, the rush of solving seemingly impossible problems, and the pride of creating something meaningful. Eric and I had always been competitive. Growing up as the children of Chinese immigrants in suburban Boston, excellence wasn't encouraged, it was expected. Our parents had sacrificed everything to give us opportunities in America, working double shifts at the restaurant they owned to pay for our education. While Eric excelled socially, becoming class president and captain of the debate team, I found my place in mathematics and computer science, often spending weekends at specialized programs while my peers attended parties. One brother to build it, one brother to sell it, our father would say proudly. The perfect combination. And for a while it was. Eric's charisma and business acumen complemented my technical expertise. He handled investors and media with natural grace, while I led our engineering team in developing our breakthrough encryption protocol. The arrangement worked until it didn't. The trouble began when Vanessa Chen joined our company as VP of Business Development. Brilliant, ambitious, and with connections throughout Silicon Valley, she was exactly what we needed to scale our business. Eric recruited her personally, convinced her expertise would help us secure the Series B funding we needed to expand internationally. She's perfect for us, Daniel, he had insisted. Harvard MBA, experience at Google and Microsoft, and she believes in what we're building. What Eric didn't mention was their previous relationship, They had dated briefly during business school before going their separate ways. I discovered this only by accident, overhearing a conversation at our company holiday party. When confronted, Eric dismissed it as irrelevant. Ancient history, he said with a laugh. We're professionals. Besides, she's engaged to some venture capital guy now. I should have recognized the warning signs. The private meetings that didn't appear on any calendar, the sudden interest Eric took in the technical aspects of our product, the subtle changes in how decisions were being made. But I was focused on perfecting our technology, addressing the vulnerabilities our security team had identified in our latest audit. 3 months ago, I returned early from a cybersecurity conference in Singapore, having cut my trip short after a breakthrough idea for solving our persistent latency issue. It was nearly midnight when I reached the office, expecting to find it empty. Instead, I saw light coming from our main conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Eric and Vanessa huddled over a laptop, surrounded by technical diagrams that looked suspiciously like my preliminary designs for our next-generation architecture. When I entered, they jumped apart like guilty teenagers. Daniel. Eric recovered quickly. You're back early. We were just reviewing some materials for the investor presentation next month. At midnight, I asked, noting how Vanessa subtly closed the laptop. The best work happens after hours, she said smoothly. Eric was helping me understand the technical infrastructure in more detail. Investors always drill down on the technology. I nodded, watching as Eric gathered the diagrams into a folder. Those look like my working designs for the distributed node architecture. Just making copies, Eric said, sliding the folder into his messenger bag. You know how thorough Vanessa likes to be with preparation. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't place it. These were people I trusted implicitly, my brother and our hand-picked executive. I pushed my suspicions aside, attributing them to travel fatigue and the perpetual stress of startup life. 1 week later, Eric suggested a new division of responsibilities in preparation for our upcoming funding round. We need to specialize more as we scale, he explained during our weekly leadership meeting. Daniel, you should focus exclusively on current product development and stability. Vanessa and I will handle the future roadmap and investor relations. The future roadmap is built on the architectural changes I'm developing, I pointed out. We can't separate them. We're not separating them, Vanessa interjected. We're just streamlining communication. Investors don't need all the technical details. They need a clear, compelling vision. The vote was 3-1. Our CFO, always more aligned with Eric's vision than mine, sided with them. I was effectively boxed out of investor presentations and strategic planning, relegated to maintaining our existing systems while my brother and Vanessa shaped the company's future. My suspicions grew when I noticed Eric had revoked my access to certain company repositories. When questioned, he cited security compartmentalization as we approached our funding round. It made little sense. I had architected our entire system. If anyone should have comprehensive access, it was me. The final confirmation came from an unexpected source. Michael Zhang, one of our senior engineers who had been with us since the beginning, requested a private meeting off-site. I thought you should know, he said hesitantly as we sat in a quiet corner of a coffee shop 2 blocks from our office. Eric and Vanessa have been meeting with the engineering team individually. They're gathering all your design documentation, asking detailed questions about your methods. They're doing due diligence for investors, I suggested, still reluctant to believe the worst. Michael shook his head. No, Daniel. They're positioning Eric as the true technical visionary behind Quantum Cipher. They've been rewriting the company history. According to the new narrative, you implemented Eric's architectural vision. You didn't create it. The betrayal felt physical, like a blow to the chest. My own brother was attempting to erase my contributions, to recast himself as the technical genius behind our success. It wasn't just about ego, it was about fundamentally misrepresenting our company to investors and the market. That night, I accessed our systems remotely, using administrator credentials only I possessed. What I found confirmed my worst fears: a completely revised investor presentation that minimized my role to early implementation support, with Eric prominently featured as the architectural visionary behind our technology. More disturbing still, I discovered emails between Eric and Vanessa discussing a post-funding reorganization that would move me to an advisory role with no operational authority. They planned to push me out of the company I had helped build from nothing. I considered my options carefully. A public confrontation would damage the company and potentially torpedo our funding round, hurting our employees and customers. Legal action would be prolonged and messy, with no guarantee outcome. I needed a solution that would reveal the truth while preserving what we had built. Then I remembered something I had implemented years ago, when we first founded the company. In our core encryption protocol, I had embedded a digital signature, a cryptographic proof of authorship that linked the fundamental architecture to my identity. It was standard practice in advanced cryptography, a way to verify authentic authorship while maintaining open-source principles. The signature wasn't hidden, exactly. It was hiding in plain sight, visible to anyone who knew exactly where to look and how to decode it. If activated during a demonstration, it would display my name and timestamp as the architectural creator, irrefutable evidence embedded in the very technology Eric was claiming as his own. I made my decision. Rather than confronting Eric directly, I would let him continue with his plan. The investor presentation was scheduled as a live demonstration of our next-generation architecture, the perfect stage for the truth to reveal itself. For the next 2 weeks, I played my part perfectly. I attended meetings, responded to technical questions, and gave no indication that I was aware of the betrayal in progress. Eric grew increasingly confident, even condescending in his interactions with me. "Don't worry about the Sanderson Venture Partners presentation," he said the day before the big meeting. "Vanessa and I have it covered. Just make sure the demo environment is stable." "Of course," I replied, hiding my anger behind a mask of professional courtesy. "Everything's prepared." The morning of the presentation arrived. Our conference room was filled with partners from Sanderson Venture Partners, one of Silicon Valley's most prestigious firms. If successful, their investment would value Quantum Cipher at over $500 million. I sat quietly at the back of the room as Eric began his presentation, watching him smoothly take credit for innovations that had kept me awake for months, for architectural insights that had come to me during countless solitary hours of work. Vanessa stood beside him, occasionally adding market context to his technical claims. "The distributed node architecture you're about to see represents a fundamental rethinking of encryption protocols," Eric explained confidently. "I developed this approach to solve the inherent vulnerabilities in traditional encryption methods." He nodded to our technical team to begin the live demonstration. On the large screen behind him, our system initialized, displaying the elegant minimalist interface I had designed. Everything seemed to be proceeding according to plan, his plan. Then, as the core protocol activated, something unexpected happened. A small window appeared in the corner of the screen, expanding rapidly to display a message. "Architectural avgk intikajon protostila activated. Primary Architecture by Daniel W. A. TIMEST AMP 06-12-2019. Unauthorized Attribution GTTTD." The room fell silent. Eric froze mid-sentence, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to barely concealed panic. "What is this?" asked Catherine Sanderson, the managing partner at Sanderson Venture Partners. "A security feature," I said, standing up from my seat at the back of the room. "One I implemented when I designed this architecture 3 years ago. It's a cryptographic proof of authorship, standard practice in secure systems development." Eric attempted to recover. Daniel worked on early implementations, of course. We all contributed. "The timestamp and cryptographic signature are immutable, Eric," I interrupted calmly. "They're embedded in the core protocol. You can't change them without breaking the entire system." What followed was the most uncomfortable 30 minutes of my professional life. With the evidence undeniable, Eric and Vanessa were forced to admit their deception. The Sanderson partners, initially angry at being misled, eventually appreciated the irony. A security company whose own technology had secured the truth about its creation. "We invest in integrity as much as innovation," Catherine Sanderson said as the meeting concluded. "We're still interested in Quantum Cipher, but we need to understand the actual leadership structure and contribution history before proceeding." In the aftermath, our board of directors called an emergency meeting. Eric and Vanessa were placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. 2 weeks later, both resigned rather than face formal dismissal. I was appointed interim CEO while the board conducted a search for permanent leadership. The funding round eventually closed, though at a somewhat lower valuation than originally projected. More importantly, Quantum Cipher survived with its core technology and team intact. Eric and I haven't spoken since that day. Our parents, devastated by the rift between their sons, have tried unsuccessfully to mediate a reconciliation. Perhaps someday that will be possible, but the wound remains too fresh, the betrayal too profound. Yesterday, I received an email from Eric, the first communication since his resignation. It contained only a single line. "You always were too clever for your own good." I didn't respond. Some messages don't require an answer. As for Quantum Cipher, we're thriving under new leadership. I returned to my role as CTO, happier focusing on technology than corporate politics. Our Series C funding closed last month, validating both our business model and our commitment to integrity. The experience taught me something valuable. In business as in programming, it's wise to build in safeguards, not out of paranoia, but pragmatism. People may surprise you, and not always pleasantly. The right validation check, implemented quietly but effectively, can be the difference between vulnerability and security. Sometimes the most important code you write isn't the one that runs your business. It's the one that protects your legacy when others try to rewrite your story. "Your grandmother's farm is worthless," the Westland Development executive declared, tossing soil samples onto my desk like they were evidence in a murder trial. "Contaminated land, outdated infrastructure. We're being generous, offering $500,000. What he didn't know was that I'd spent the last 3 years secretly transforming that worthless land into the most valuable property in the county, not for its development potential, but for what grew beneath its surface. My name is Elena Morales, and until recently, most people in Riverdale knew me only as Abuela Rosa's granddaughter who moved back from the city. What they didn't know was that I'd returned with a master's degree in agricultural science and a plan to save not just my grandmother's farm, but our entire agricultural community. I still remember the day I decided to come home. I was sitting in my sterile corporate office at Agri-Tech Industries, reviewing genetic modification proposals for drought-resistant corn, when an email from my cousin landed in my inbox. Developers circling Abuela's farm again. She's refusing to meet with them, but they're persistent, offering buyouts all over the valley. Attached was a community newsletter featuring Westland Development's grand vision for Riverdale Valley, Sunset Estates, luxury living in the heart of nature. The digital rendering showed cookie-cutter mansions where family farms had stood for generations, complete with artificial lakes and a golf course. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was my grandmother's 80-acre farm replaced by what appeared to be a shopping center. I requested a leave of absence that same day. By the weekend, I had packed my apartment and headed home to the valley where 4 generations of my family had worked the land. Abuela Rosa was 85 when I returned, her body bent from decades of farming but her mind sharp as ever. She wasn't surprised to see me. "You saw the vultures circling," she said, pouring me coffee at the warm kitchen table where she taught me to shell peas as a child. "They think because I'm old, I'm ready to surrender. Are you?" I asked. "They're offering good money, Abuela." Her dark eyes flashed. "This land fed our family when we had nothing else. Your grandfather and I paid for it acre by acre, season by season. What would we be without it?" "But the farm barely breaks even now," I said gently. "The market for conventional crops." "Conventional," she snorted. "Your grandfather would laugh at that word. There was nothing conventional about how we farmed before the chemicals and the big tractors came." She took my hand, her skin papery against mine. "The old ways are sleeping, Elena, not dead." That night, I walked the property alone. The moonlight illuminated fields that had once burst with diverse crops but now grew only commodity corn and soybeans. The soil, once rich and black, had thinned and paled from years of heavy pesticide use and monoculture farming practices I had helped develop and promote in my corporate role. In the far corner of the property stood a small wooden shed I remembered from childhood, my grandfather's seed sanctuary. With a flashlight borrowed from the house, I broke the rusted padlock and stepped inside. The air was dry and still, smelling faintly of dust and dried herbs. Along the walls stood dozens of glass jars, carefully labeled in my grandfather's handwriting. Morales tomato, 1972, Valley beans, 1968, Rosa's peppers, 1965. Heritage seeds, Varieties my grandparents had saved and cultivated specifically for this valley, this soil, this climate, before industrial agriculture changed everything. I lifted a jar, wondering if any life still remained in these dormant treasures. The next morning, I presented Abuela with a proposition. Give me 3 years to revitalize the farm using sustainable methods and her traditional knowledge. If I failed, she could sell to the developers with my blessing. 3 years, she agreed. But I won't sell, even if you fail. I'll burn it to the ground first. Her smile told me she expected neither outcome. I began by testing the viability of my grandfather's seed collection. To my amazement, many varieties germinated in my makeshift greenhouse. From agronomists at my former university, I learned cutting-edge regenerative agriculture techniques that, ironically, complemented my grandparents' traditional methods. I sectioned off 5 acres for intensive restoration, composting, cover cropping, minimal tillage. The work was consuming, and for months I barely noticed the escalating pressure from Westland Development. Their representatives became regular visitors, each offering larger sums for the property. When monetary incentives failed, subtle threats began. Mentions of eminent domain, hints at water rights challenges, suggestions that an elderly woman couldn't possibly maintain proper environmental compliance. During this time, I also discovered something remarkable. In testing our soil against neighboring properties, I found that despite decades of conventional farming, portions of our land had maintained unusual microbial diversity. Something had protected it from the worst effects of agricultural chemicals. The answer came from Abuela Rosa during one of our evening sessions recording her agricultural knowledge. Your grandfather always kept the old ways in small places, she told me. The north field's border, the wet patch by the creek, the strip behind the shed. He planted the traditional companion plants there, just enough to keep the good insects, to feed the soil. He called them his seed guardians. These small overlooked areas had preserved the soil microbiome that industrial agriculture had stripped from surrounding farms. It was our hidden advantage, the foundation upon which our restoration work could build more quickly. By the end of the first year, our 5-acre test plot was showing remarkable results. The heritage vegetable varieties, adapted through generations to our specific local conditions, thrived with minimal inputs once the soil began to recover. We established a small weekend farm stand, selling our produce directly to the community. Word spread. Neighbors began stopping by, first out of curiosity, then returning for the flavor of tomatoes they remembered from childhood, for beans that actually tasted like beans. Local chefs from farm-to-table restaurants in nearby towns made the drive to purchase our heirloom varieties. These peppers, one chef said, holding up a basket of my grandmother's distinctive twisted red chilies, I haven't seen these since my grandmother's kitchen. Where did you find them? They never left, I told him. They were just waiting. As interest grew, I began offering informal workshops on seed saving and regenerative techniques. To my surprise, many attendees were from neighboring farms, the same families who had been considering Westland's Baya offers. Marcus Green, whose family farm bordered ours to the east, pulled me aside after one such workshop. Elena, what you're doing here, it's making me reconsider. Westland offered us $1.2 million, but seeing what's possible with the old crops, the better methods, my kids are suddenly interested in farming again. This was an unexpected development. The children of farmers like me had been leaving the valley for decades. The average age of a Riverdale farmer was nearly 60. But now younger generations were showing renewed interest in a type of agriculture that connected to their heritage while incorporating modern sustainability science. By the second year, we had expanded our regeneration efforts to 20 acres. We installed a small processing facility in a converted barn, allowing us to create value-added products. Salsas from Abuela's peppers, dried beans and heritage varieties, cornmeal from traditional maize. Our profit per acre was 5 times what it had been under conventional methods, with significantly lower input costs. Westland Development noticed. Their representative, a slick executive named James Harrington, requested a meeting at our farm. Ms. Morales, he began, sitting uncomfortably at my grandmother's kitchen table, your experiment here is charming. But surely you understand it's not scalable. Sentimentality about old farming methods won't feed the world. I pushed a folder across the table, our financial projections and soil health metrics over 2 years. per acre profitability exceeding conventional methods by 380%. Carbon sequestration rates that qualify for emerging climate credits. Biodiversity increases documented by the state university. This isn't sentiment, Mr. Harrington. It's science. He barely glanced at the documents. Westland is prepared to offer $800,000 for the property, double our original offer. Your grandmother can live out her days in comfort. The farm is not for sale. His smile tightened. Perhaps you should consider the broader picture. Riverdale needs economic development, tax base expansion, jobs. Sunset Estates will bring prosperity to a declining agricultural community. Prosperity for whom? I asked. Not for the farming families who've been here for generations. Not for the ecosystem that supports this valley. Progress requires change, Ms. Morales. Fight it if you must, but Westland has secured options on nearly 70% of the properties we need. This development will proceed with or without your cooperation. After you left, I sat with Abuela in the garden, surrounded by plants grown from her saved seeds. The valley spread before us, green and golden in the afternoon light. 70%, I murmured. If that's true, we've already lost. She plucked a ripe tomato from the vine, its skin mottled with a distinctive pattern that made our family variety unique. When I first came to this valley as a young bride, the old women taught me something important. No harvest is guaranteed. Sometimes you plant, you tend, you pray, and still the crops fail. But always, always you save the seeds. Her words stayed with me as I spent the night reviewing property maps of the valley, marking which farms had likely signed options with Westland. By morning, a plan had begun to form, not to defeat the development directly, but to create something that would endure regardless. I called an emergency meeting of the farmers who had been attending our workshops. 20 families gathered in our barn that weekend, representing farms both large and small. Westland claims to have options on 70% of the valley, I began. Even if that's an exaggeration, we're facing the end of farming as we know it here. But we have something they don't value yet. I held up jars of heritage seeds, each adapted through generations to our specific valley. These varieties, combined with the regenerative methods we've been practicing, are uniquely suited to this land. They're drought-resistant, disease-resistant, and produce exceptional flavor with minimal inputs. And they're becoming increasingly valuable in the specialty food market. Marcus Green spoke up. My option with Westland expires in 6 months. Until then, I'm still farming my land. Exactly, I nodded. I'm proposing we create a seed and knowledge cooperative. Each participating farm dedicates 5 acres to growing out heritage varieties using regenerative methods. We share the seeds, techniques, and marketing resources. Most importantly, we create a legal structure that protects these agricultural assets regardless of land ownership. Sarah Johnson, whose family have farmed in the valley for 6 generations, looked skeptical. How does this help if we still lose our farms? Because the seeds and knowledge will survive, I explained. We create conservation easements on portions of our properties. We establish a land trust for farms that haven't signed options, and we prove, acre by acre, that our method of agriculture is more profitable and sustainable than what came before. Or what would come after, added Marcus. The Riverdale Heritage Seed Collective was born that day. Through the remainder of my 3-year commitment to Abuela, we expanded from individual resistance to coordinated action. University extension offices helped document our varieties. Legal aid organizations helped establish conservation easements. Chefs and food writers brought attention to the unique flavors and stories of our crops. By the time James Harrington returned to my grandmother's kitchen table, the landscape, both literal and figurative, had shifted. Your grandmother's farm is worthless, he declared, tossing soil samples onto my desk like they were evidence in a murder trial. Contaminated land, outdated infrastructure. We're being generous, offering $500,000. I studied him for a moment, noting the desperation behind his bravado. Their project was behind schedule. Investors were getting nervous. Contaminated? I echoed. That's interesting, considering our soil has been certified organic by the state. As for infrastructure, our processing facilities handled nearly $2 million in specialty crop products last year. Perhaps Westland's due diligence is as outdated as your understanding of modern sustainable agriculture. I handed him a thick folder, our counter-proposal from the Riverdale Heritage Seed Collective. 30 participating farms. Conservation easements on key agricultural parcels. A certified seed bank of varieties uniquely adapted to this valley. And a sustainable agriculture training center that's already received grant funding. The economics are quite compelling. His face darkened as he skimmed the document. This changes nothing. We have binding options. On parcels now encumbered by conservation easements, I finished for him. Your legal team will explain the implications. But more importantly, you're facing a simple financial reality. Our cooperative's per-acre profitability now exceeds anything your development could generate in property tax revenue for the county. The county commissioners have unanimously approved our application for special agricultural district status. I interrupted again. It seems they're quite proud of Riverdale Valley becoming recognized as a center for agricultural innovation and food heritage. The governor is attending the designation ceremony next month. Harrington left without making further threats, and 2 weeks later, Westland Development announced they were re-evaluating the Sunset Estates project in light of emerging agricultural innovations in the region. Within a month, they had sold their options back to the original landowners at a significant loss. Today, 5 years after I returned to my grandmother's farm, the Riverdale Valley looks both familiar and transformed. Family farms still dominate the landscape, but now they're diversified, resilient, and increasingly operated by younger generations who have found purpose in connecting traditional knowledge with modern science. The Riverdale Heritage Seed Collective now includes 45 farms and manages over 2,000 acres of land dedicated to preserving and evolving heritage varieties. Our seed bank holds over 300 locally adapted vegetable, grain, and herb varieties, many saved by farm families for generations. Our training center hosts farmers from across the country who come to learn how traditional wisdom combined with regenerative science can revitalize rural communities. Abuela Rosa, now 90, still works in her garden daily. Last month, as we harvested this year's seed crops together, a group of agricultural students from the State University came to record her knowledge of companion planting and natural pest management, techniques her grandmother taught her, which science is now confirming as effective. You see, she told them, her hands deftly separating seeds from chaff. The old ways and the new ways, they are not enemies. They are like the corn and the beans and the squash that we plant together. Each one makes the others stronger. One student asked her if she was ever tempted by the developer's money, by the ease retirement could have brought after decades of physical labor. Abuela looked out across the fields where her heritage peppers grew alongside innovative companion crops, where solar panels powered efficient irrigation systems, where neighboring farmers worked land their families had tended for generations. What grows here is worth more than money, she said simply. It is the past and the future growing together in the same soil. Later, as the students departed and the evening settled around us, I walked with Abuela to the highest point on our farm. The valley spread below, a patchwork of fields and forests bathed in golden light. In the distance, a new barn was rising on the Johnson property, built to house their expanded seed-saving operation. When you came back, Abuela said, I thought you were here to save just our farm. I didn't realize you were planting something much bigger. I smiled, thinking of how my corporate agriculture career had once seemed like success, how I had nearly missed the true value of what my grandparents had preserved. The best seeds, I told her, echoing words she had spoken to me countless times, always contain more than we can see at first glance. She nodded, satisfied, as darkness slowly claimed the valley. Around us, invisible in the soil beneath our feet, billions of microorganisms continued their ancient work of renewal and regeneration. And in barns and homes throughout Riverdale, carefully labeled jars of seeds waited for another season, another generation, another chance to grow.